sounds like we're ready for Professor Bonnie Youngs from Carnegie Mellon University in beautiful Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Bonnie, are you there? Go ahead and push your talk button.
I am here, and don't josh it. It's a beautiful Indian summer, pretty nice, and mid-70s during the day. So except for the Pirates loss, Pittsburgh's doing pretty well. So hi, everybody. I am actually teaching online in a webinar for the very first time in my life. And so if I blow it, we all know what it's like to teach online, and you'll forgive me, I'm sure. So I was asked to talk about best practices for learner-instructor interaction in online language learning. And I like best practices because, as Herman said, it's hard to be personable online, but I think you've all done it already. You've used your voices, you've used your chat, you've used stories, examples, and that's one way of making ourselves more personable, more human through the online interaction. So if everybody can hear me, I will try this. Okay, so you see Bonnie. This was Bonnie. Bonnie was the skeptic. When we started our online courses at CMU, I refused to teach them. I refused to have anything to do with them at all because I did not think that it worked. And so one of the questions that I have in the discussion for later on, if you guys ever do this again, is do you believe that second languages can be learned online as effectively as in face-to-face classroom, with an S? I did not. And so what I had to do was, I was stubborn as a mule, still am. What I had to do was ask myself, what's the research say? And it is a mule, Stephen. Do you want me to stop? So what I had to do in order to change myself from being a skeptic to being a believer was look at the research. And at the time, we had doctoral students in our program in second language acquisition, and they were doing some research. Sorry, I'm reading your comments. I can't do everything. What research have I? So the doctoral students were doing research, and they found through their doctoral dissertation research that the students do in fact learn as well online and also learn to speak online. So then Bonnie became a chicken, and this is a chicken. And Bonnie was like, okay, what is she going to do? How is she going to do it? And so what we did was we took the cow by the horns, not the bull. I couldn't find a picture of the bull. And I decided to think about how I could actually do well when I was teaching online. And so the two questions that I give you, and that you probably already think about, is what teaching strengths do you have, perhaps transferring from the face-to-face classroom, although we all know that transferring everything from face-to-face to online does not work. But there are some things, and whether it's the jokes that we make, whether it's our personality that comes through on the smiley faces, there is something or many things that you do that can be transferred to online in a positive way. But then again, there's also the hurdle. And the hurdle can be very difficult. And my hurdle was obviously my bias. And then when I started teaching distance, I actually did a teleconferencing class in our hybrid mode for our students in Qatar. And that was very challenging because I was not able to get to the students. I couldn't mix in with them. And I found some tricks, such as learning their names, and then they would be really freaked out when I would call their names and ask them what they were talking about in the back of the classroom. But what are the things that you find are the most difficult for you? And so what I did for you guys tonight, since it's night here, is I put my ideas into two different sorts of contracts. Now, they're not official contracts. There's what I term the course contract, and then what I term the teaching and learning contract. The course contract has four pieces to it, and I'll explain them all briefly, but I'm sure you'll recognize a lot. And for me, the course contract is that as learner and instructor enter into this agreement to be in their course, to learn in their course, to do their best, there are certain expectations that we can have of them and that they can have of us. And if everybody keeps more or less to the contract, then we can be successful. So the learner awareness is that they understand the syllabus, which is, okay, kind of a university word, but they understand what they're going to learn in the course. They need to know and accept when the instructor is available. They can't expect an email response at 2 a.m. because most of us are sleeping at 2 a.m. They need to remain aware of their responsibilities concerning deadlines and due dates. What kind of penalties will they receive if they hand in their homework late or if they miss a test? And they have to know how to get the feedback. So depending on the course that you're teaching in, I, for example, can give students feedback in our online course in the discussion forum. I can give it to them via email, but I cannot give them feedback on the exercises that they do, which are basically audiolingual method exercises. But I don't have access to their answers. And so I have to figure out how to give them the feedback, but they have to know where to go to get it. The students have to know the technology, and they have to learn online. Exactly, Bridget. They have to learn how to learn online. And what happens there is that the instructor awareness then comes into play. So the instructor has many responsibilities, but within the course contract, it's explain what the course is about. Be clear on and keep to your availabilities. It's like keeping office hours. If you're going to be there from 5 to 7 p.m., then be there from 5 to 7 p.m. And if you can't give them as much notice as possible, be consistent with your due dates. Give them their helpful feedback and carry out your penalties. I know I sound a little Machiavellian, but they have to know that they're responsible and that you are going to make them responsible. It's up to the instructor, and this was my hurdle, to understand the new environment and to learn the technology. And we have to learn to teach online. And a lot of it has to do with what Marta just explained to us, which is knowing how to get the students to use their brain and use interaction in order to learn. But we also need to be responsible for student strategies. If we can take a step back for a second, Ashley said we spend a lot of time in the first quarter teaching them how to take an online course. Part of my current research is looking at the back-end data of our French online course. And what I'm trying to do is interpret what the computer is telling us in terms of what the students do while they're working online. Do they skip this exercise? Do they spend more time on this exercise? Are they successful here? Do they visit this page? What do they do when they're on this page? Do they listen to the video? Do they listen to it multiple times? Do they stop the video multiple times? And what I'm hoping to learn from this data mining is how we can identify successful strategies for learning online and then integrate those strategies as best we can into our online courses. So hopefully the entire first quarter doesn't become how to take an online course. We can start integrating the strategies right away. But I probably won't finish before I retire. In any case, course material awareness is also part of the course contract. And from the teacher's perspective, what are the learning outcomes that we're targeting? We have to know where we're going. what are the learner's goals for the course materials? Is it that this is a required course, which makes it more difficult for the instructor? Is it that this is an elective but is falling behind the list of AP English, AP Science, AP Math, et cetera, how can we, both instructor and learner, learn to work with the course materials in the online environment? And again, these teaching and learning behaviors, what can we do to exploit the course materials to the best of their capacity? Because we all know that there are limitations to course materials and there are limitations to the delivery. And then do the course materials provide for adequate assessment and feedback opportunities? I think we're all very familiar with the limitations of some course materials, and it's always a challenge. Yeah, Blackboard's not my favorite thing. So the last part of the course contract is the technology awareness. And the question here is, does the student know what the technology is? For example, Blackboard. Is it, and the teacher has to know the technology as well. So I use Blackboard, but I only use it to the very, very minimum. And when they come out with a new update, I get extremely flustered and I have no idea what I'm supposed to do next. So the questions that we need to address between the instructor and the learner are what will we be using the technology for? Now, very often the technology is an online workbook, but it's not the kind of workbook we can collect and then read what the students have done and understand what their thinking is. If that's the case, then how do we determine the learning outcomes? Have they been achieved or have they not been achieved? And is it the technology that's going to tell us whether or not the students have learned? Is it the assessment and the feedback? Is it sufficient? If the technology is limited to online workbookness, then how will that impact learning, and how does that impact then the way you're going to teach your students? And this is what I propose personally for my own self is, what other tasks can be enhanced by technology use, especially if your course materials are very limited and inadequate? Then what else can we do? Now, we don't want to add so much technology that the students become overwhelmed. Of course not. But if you feel your students aren't getting enough pronunciation practice or enough extemporaneous speaking practice, then maybe they can use Audacity, which to my knowledge is free. And if I can learn how to use it and teach myself, then I'm sure they can do it. It's very straightforward. You give them an exercise or a task and you say, talk to me about X for 2 minutes. And then they send you a 2-minute piece of audio. And from there, you can respond to it in the target language. You can make a recording and say, okay, watch how you speak, how you pronounce this. Be aware of your word order, of your agreement, whatever it is. Yay, Bridget. Whatever it is that the student needs, especially if you feel, again, that it's either a particularly shy student who's not doing well in synchronous mode. Okay, Roman, you tell me what those are, because Audacity still flusters me a little bit. And in that way, you can maybe help a student who's a little bit more timid in the synchronous mode and get them to do some recording asynchronously. So these are the little ways that we as instructors can help technology add to what we do with the course materials, but then take a step forward, shall we say, or step sideways outside of them. So those are the 4 awarenesses of the course contract, and you're asking yourself, well, what does this have to do with interaction? Well, for me, interaction is not just the interaction that Martha talked about. It's not using the language per se. It's more, how do we interact with each other in the online environment? And so the second contract. It's the teaching and learning contract. And of course, we also have to say who are our learners. Are they middle schoolers? Are they high schoolers? Etc. I have a list in a minute. What are our responsibilities as instructors? So if you're not new to online, then you know that it's administration for the most part, content delivery or assuring content delivery through good technology, assessing as appropriately as we can, and then I have an example of task development, task extension at the end of the presentation. So obviously, my online students are 18 to 80, but if you're dealing with less mature students, if you're dealing with students who have had prior experience with online courses, maybe they took a MOOC and they think that they know that that's how online work goes, then they are not perhaps as aware of the type of interaction you'll be looking for in this teaching and learning contract. So we need to know what they know. We need to know what their experience is with the required technology. We, again, need to know if they've had other online courses, and it could be very well that a course in chemistry online is not going to be at all like a course in second language online, and there will be different expectations and different course contracts, if you will, between the student and the instructor in different types of courses online. We also want to take a look at their motivation and their engagement. Engagement in the course is also something I'm trying to look at, although I'm not sure how to define it yet, and so I keep reading in the research to see what I can find. But if a student is pretty apathetic about taking a language because it's a requirement and it's online, and so there's that distance between us, then that's going to be tough for teachers to get over in terms of a hurdle. How can we get the students to be more engaging? And you know, Herman's personality, it came through in the chat, and I have no idea what he even looks like. But if we can motivate them and engage them through us in our day-to-day interactions, then hopefully that will facilitate the language skill and content interactions down the road. These students, as you know, also have to be self-regulated. And depending on how old they are, that could be a real challenge. But how can we get them to learn to self-regulate and to say, I need to do this homework a bit every day, because we all know that cramming doesn't work whether you're online or face-to-face. But even at the university level, I find it's very difficult to get students to self-regulate and to take those independent steps. And this is where the strategy building that I talked about earlier can come into play. So your responsibilities as an instructor, and I'm sure you know many, if not all of these, but if you're new to online teaching and learning, there are ways to get to know the learners. And whether it's an online conversation, whether it's a quick chat in English, whether it is through the class and getting to know their names, whether it's a survey through SurveyMonkey that you give them so that you know what sports they play, what instruments they play, what do they hope to do with their lives, those types of things. And developing a community of learners is difficult when it's in a pure distance course, but we're able to do that somewhat through synchronous written chat. And I what's the word I want? I rotate the partners so that first I pair them homogeneously, so that I put the weaker with the weaker, so that they don't get overwhelmed with somebody who maybe is really clever. But then as everybody kind of gets to the same point in the course, I change their partners so that they can get to know each other. And then when I'm in my Skype meetings with them, I'll mention, oh yes, so-and-so did that, or so-and-so is having the same trouble, so that they know that there are other people out there. We have to build trust with them, which means keeping to our word, which is part, I think, of the course contract. Be yourself. Don't be Don't be me, for goodness sake. Don't be Stephen. But whatever your personality is, however you interact with students in a face-to-face context, we do have to be careful because the computer does create a barrier and certain things can be misunderstood, but we can still show our personalities by comments we make on their feedback, by support that we give them. Again, in our written feedback, this was a really great essay, or my family's the same way. Ask the learners, keep track of them. So in the French Online course, I can see where the students have been in the course. I can see what pages they have clicked on. Now, I don't know how long they spent on that page unless I go deep into the data, which is not immediately accessible. And I can't see if they've done any exercises, but I can at least see a little bit of what they're doing and what they're thinking. Ask them questions about their work and how it's going. And then suggest strategies for succeeding in the online environment, especially if you are a teacher who has experience with students of a particular age or a particular group. You already know how to be successful, and there are things that you can suggest. The list of responsibilities goes on. We have to be confident in our course materials. We have to know the limitations of our materials. We also have to be confident in the technology and be able to troubleshoot. There will be some things probably that are normal. Did you run your updates? Did you install Java? Did you do X, Y, and Z? And if there are going to be problems or questions that we can't troubleshoot as instructors, then we need to have access, or the students need to have access to somebody who is going to get back to them, I would say within 24 hours, ideally, so that their work doesn't become, doesn't lag behind because they're having technology issues. Be clear about your grading and your, again, penalty policies. We do have to take points off sometimes. Assess transparently. Be flexible. Things happen. Life happens. And I'm sure you're like this in the face-to-face classroom. There's no reason we can't be flexible also online. And plan. Plan. If you're going to have online Skype meetings with your students, if you're going to have class meetings with your students, you have to have as much planning done for the online as you have for any face-to-face class we've ever taught. And have backup plans. That's something I try and teach my master's students as well. So I want to talk about, for my last few minutes, I want to talk about task development or task execution. Now, if your course materials are good, then you are completely lucky and use them to the greatest degree possible. If your course materials are less than what you would like, then we need to look at the activities and perhaps turn them into tasks or even extend them. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. And we, of course, have to remain aware of the differences between synchronous and asynchronous tasks. Usually, speaking tasks are synchronous. Written chat tasks can be synchronous or asynchronous. And student personalities are going to prefer one mode or the other. So I have a story for you. So here is a failed task due to lack of foresight. And so it was the first semester elementary language course, and the students were to do synchronous written chat in pairs. And the instructions were basically 20 questions game. So student A thinks of a famous person, and the other student types yes or no questions in order to guess the identity. So, are you thinking what's going to happen? These are the questions that should have been thought about, should have been asked prior to developing or proposing that task for students to do. Will the learners be able to engage in meaningful interactions? What will be the balance and type of discourse between the two learners? How much language will the learners most likely produce? And how much time on task can the learners reasonably be expected to spend? All right, so now you're thinking very deeply. Answering these questions with a 20 questions activity, because I don't really think it's a task. Right? Are you dying to have the answers? There they are. Did the learners, and I have the chat script, so I read these, I taught this class. They did not engage in meaningful interaction because I said, my famous person is Stephen. Stephen, is he tall? Yes. Is he short? Yes. Is he blonde? Yes. Is he brunette? Yes. Does he wear glasses? Yes. That is not meaningful interaction. What was the balance in the type of discourse between the two learners? It was completely unbalanced because I, as student A, only have to answer yes or no. And unless they change roles, then that's it. I just have to say yes or no. And it's very simple and straightforward. Either inversion questions, maybe ESCA, yes or no questions, for example, in French. How much language will the learners most likely produce? Very little. Well, that's the thing, Stephen, is that it would be balanced in the sense that they both asked and answered questions. But the problem, I think, is the biggest problem I find is the fourth bullet, which is how much time on task did they spend? At the university level, 2 students, each taking the questioning role, total about 5 minutes worth of time, which is not really enough time on task. So if this were, think about it, if this were a task proposed by your course materials, then basically it fails. So what can we do? We can revise it. And this actually did happen. Again, I have this chat transcript from students. So same type of class, same synchronous written chat, only the instructions are a little bit different. And yes, Jenny, that's true. We like them to answer in full statements, in full answers. But if you think about, is he tall? Yes, he is tall. Is he short? Yes, he is short. The vocabulary doesn't really get that much extension on it. So this is the blind date. And so student A is trying to set up student B with student C. Now, student C is not in this conversation at all right? It's only student A and student B. So you think they'll get along, and you really, really, really want to convince student B to accept this blind date. But student B is concerned, very reserved, and so asks a lot of questions about student C. And student A, whenever the questions come up, really tries to convince student B to go on the date. And this, did it succeed? Drum roll. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It was absolutely one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. Well, let's see, what was the question that was asked? Well, they study science. Oh, and you like science too, right? Well, yeah, I like science. What kind of science do they study? So it was yes, no questions, but also content questions. Why, where, when. The balance of the type of discourse, really pretty equal, because you really want to, it's very competitive. You really want to convince student B. You really, really, really want them to accept this date. And student B is like, don't force me into this, dude. I really, really am not sure. I want to get all the information I can. And so the balance is much more equal. There's much more meaningful activity. The discourse is at a much more complicated level. The language they produce was just in terms of sheer quantity, was much more. And we were able to get 2 learners, same level as the 20 questions, to spend about 30 minutes in written chat. Now, granted, there's time lags between what you write and what you respond back and forth like that. But 5 minutes for 30 minutes, this is what I mean by extension. If the course materials give you something that's pretty lame, then how can you tweak it just a little bit to turn it into a true task where true meaningful interactions can be achieved by the learners? And they themselves, of course, feel great because they have accomplished something that's pretty interesting. So this is it, boys and girls. So we've discovered that learners do learn online. We've discovered that instructors can instruct online. Continue to be the great teacher that you are. Be prepared, be yourself, support the learners when and where you can, and constantly add new skills to your skill set for teaching online. And remember that interaction comes in many flavors. There's the cognitive interaction that Marta talked about, but then there's the administration, then there's the course delivery, and then there's those personal interactions. As Marta concluded, that teacher caring is also a form of interaction that can make face-to-face classes successful, but which can also make online classes successful. So I went over time, but we have 8 minutes for questions. Thank you.
See, I raised my hand. I'm jumping in because I'm reminded of when I used to teach on interactive television in the 1990s. I had about 5 different sites that were all in full audio and video communication with one another. So I could link, people could speak to one another across sites. But at the same time, we only had one spoken channel, sort of like we have here in Collaborate. So I developed a few activity types that made use of the technology to hide things from some parts of the class while showing them to others. So for example, I would simply say to the students at Maui, please turn off your television monitor right now so you won't have any video, but you'll still be able to hear us. And then I would put a visual up on the screen and ask the other students to each describe one part of the image that they were seeing. And then the Maui students' task was to draw a picture of what they were hearing. And then they would use the visual presenter at Maui to show what they had drawn, and we would compare it with the original image. But it strikes me you could play the dating game, the blind date game, that way. You could ask students to give a picture of student C and email it to the teacher. You could put that picture up, but ask one student to to not look at their screen so that they wouldn't be able to see the image, and they would be able to ask questions about the picture, but not look at the picture until afterwards, and they would sort of be able to compare the impression that they got by asking questions with the visual image that ended up on screen. I don't think I explained that very well.
Well, I was going to say, especially if the picture comes with a lot of extra information visually, sports, studies, domestic animals, family, travel, those kinds of things.
Okay, I think Herman has a question. Go ahead, Herman.
Okay, well, Herman, maybe he's still getting his question ready. Oh,
I had a total fail there. Basically, I would love to have another interactive activity that you've used, like the one you just suggested in the course, where the students meet synchronously and then either export a chat around a prompt, or maybe like an audio recording. Do you have anything else along those lines that does encourage task execution in the online environment for your students?
Well, I think it could depend. This one I like very much. Um, but I have when I do distance learning in the summer, this past summer, I had a student in Seattle, one in Jersey, one in Washington, one in Pittsburgh, and one in India. But what I was able to do with the students in Qatar and the students in Pittsburgh is when they described their apartments or their housemates or their families or their food, it actually became really real because the cultures were so different. And if you were able to pinpoint something, I mean, in North Carolina, there must be lots of college football teams. If you know your students are especially into American football, if they think that if they're particularly political and they want to be Republicans and Democrats, or if you've taught them content about different things, the way things work in Spain and the way things work in Latin America or Mexico, then they could do some comparison and contrast depending on the level. And I do believe that most things can be done on elementary, intermediate, and advanced levels if we, again, tweak them a little bit. But I would find something where they really, really, really either wanted to fight about or really wanted to compare and say, well, this is better than the other.
Bridget has just posted a question for North Carolina Virtual Public School folks about the Blackboard IM, and it came to my mind during Bonnie's talk that, branching out to another technology can extend the functionality of your course, but then it also has a negative aspect, which is juggling lots of different technologies. And so then having a course homepage, the central place where the students come to get their information, and making the links from that homepage seamless out to the other technologies becomes really important.
Right. Some of my just the reason I mention it is because some of my students, when they start the synchronous coaching sessions, they know Blackboard Collaborate, but then they don't really know the difference between Blackboard Collaborate and Blackboard Instant Messenger. It's like this additional technology that they have to learn. It goes back to that course contract that Bonnie was talking about. So, um, talking about Flash meeting. Um, that sounds like a really interesting tool we might want to consider using. Katja says Moodle has a good chat feature and saves the chat. Ooh, very nice. Oh, and breakout groups and Blackboard Collaborate turn ads. Yes, technology overload is an issue. I totally agree with you. Okay, sorry. Are there any other questions? Go ahead. Jenny?
Hey, Bonnie. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Great. So I just had a little bit similar question about, you were suggesting some ways that people can use technology, but also what would you suggest to help students form those more open-ended questions with each other? For example, instead of asking, do you have a sister? And then the other student might just say yes. They might make it a yes/no thing. How would you encourage students to use more open-ended questions?
Well, I guess my question back to you would be, how would you do it if you were in a face-to-face classroom? You would probably have some sort of a chart, like a jigsaw exercise or an information gap, where students needed to find particular information. Think of it also, I don't know if you're familiar with oral proficiency interviews. We don't ask a lot of yes/no questions because, like you say, do you have a sister? Yes. Do you have a brother? Yes. That's not going to get us to extended discourse. But I can follow that up with, can you describe your sister? and then you find something that you're particularly interested in and branch off from there. But so we just watched a video, for example, in my second, right, or tell me about open-ended. We just watched a video quickly in the textbook that we're using in my face-to-face class. And the students are going to find out whether or not this date worked out. And what I had them do was I had them work the reflexive verbs in the past tense and the imparfait as well, the imperfect tense for describing emotions, because the lady did not want to go on the date with this especially timid man. I know, pretty generic. And so I had 5 students work on what the woman did to prepare for the date that she didn't want to go on to, and 5 students prepare for what the man did before his date because he really wanted to go. And then I put them in pairs, one of them the man and one of them the woman, and then they had to talk to each other about what each person did to get ready for the date. And then I extended that and I asked them to actually discuss what happened during the date. And I gave them a model was she never wanted to go out with him again because he spilled his soup on her and she had to go to the hospital because she was burned. And because I had just burned myself in the kitchen, I had already explained that to them a few days before. And so they made up these stories just on and on and on because they had the groundwork, and then I let them just be creative. So we can talk about real things, but we can also talk about pretend or create things. And I think sometimes letting their creativity run the conversation can actually get them to talk more. But again, like I said to Herman, anybody wants to email me about ideas or how to extend things, please do, because I know we don't have a lot of time tonight to talk about things. But it's one of my passions, so I would be happy to help in any way I can.